The key to building bigger arms is not what you think. It's not about some special set of exercise variations, hammering them with tons of volume and frequency, targeting the deep stretch, or whatever other gimmicky nonsense everyone is telling you on YouTube and social media these days. In this video, we're going to cut through all the BS and get right down to what actually works and what you really need to focus on to achieve the thick, meaty, girthy arms you're after as efficiently as possible. So let's start with the biceps. There's no end to the different curling variations and biceps training techniques you'll find online, but the truth is that 95% of it is bullshit. The biceps are a relatively small muscle that mainly perform elbow flexion, aka bending your arm. There are only so many different ways you can do that, and whether it's this, or whatever else, they can all effectively stimulate your biceps for growth, including both the long and the short head. You don't need to worry about isolating one head over the other. It's not going to make a meaningful difference over the long term. By the end of any set of curls taken close to failure, both heads will be fully taxed, and all these videos showing you how to sculpt a taller biceps peak by biasing the long head, or how to get wider biceps by hitting the short head, that's really just clickbait that distracts you from the things that actually matter for proper biceps exercise selection. And what actually matters? 3 main points. Number one, very simple, is that you're using a supinated grip. A slight angle is fine if that feels better on your wrists, but as you move toward neutral, you'll disadvantage the biceps and shift more work onto the brachialis, which is another upper arm flexor that sits between the biceps and triceps. And then as you move toward pronated, you'll be hitting more brachioradialis, which is this forearm muscle here. Now you can add in dedicated neutral or pronated grip movements if you want to hone in on those muscles specifically. The difference will probably be minor overall since the brachialis and brachioradialis are trained on all your curls in general, but to maximize tension on the biceps specifically, a mostly supinated grip will be ideal. The next main factor is comfort, so finding variations that feel smooth on your wrists and elbows and that allow you to progressively overload over the long term. And everyone is a bit different here, so that's something you can test out. Barbell curls, for example, are totally fine for some people, whereas others start to experience discomfort as they go heavier. No single curling variation is going to produce massively better results than another, so there's no need to force yourself into doing any particular one if it's giving you pain. And then third is to put your main focus on curls that are heaviest in the bottom half of the range, so anywhere from the fully lengthened position up to the mid position. Now this doesn't mean you need some kind of crazy balls deep stretch on every set, but overall the biceps probably do grow best when trained at longer lengths. You'll tend to feel squeeze-based movements more intensely since blood can't flow out of the muscle as efficiently at shorter lengths, and you'll get a cramping sensation from the muscle basically being more bunched up, but more feel doesn't necessarily mean more gains. In fact, mechanical tension, which is the actual driver of hypertrophy, it's not something you can consciously feel since there are no nerves inside the muscle fibers to detect it. Including curls that load the top half is totally fine, but it shouldn't be the only type you're doing or the ones that get the majority of the focus. So here are a few solid options you can include. The first would be a preacher curl. Now the biceps do cross the shoulder and act as a shoulder flexor, and so they are put into a slightly shortened starting position here since the shoulders are flexed, but preacher curls will still maximize load in the lengthened position of the range since they're heaviest at the bottom. You also have the pad to drive your arms against, so it's highly stable. Not that stability is a big factor for a simple movement like a curl, but it definitely doesn't hurt either. Preacher curls can be done free weight with a bar or dumbbells or using a machine, and cables are an option too, but there's no real advantage in this case, and they're just more tedious to set up. Just keep in mind that different machines have different resistance profiles, and so if your machine is heavier in the top half of the range, what you can do is slide your elbows back behind the pivot point, which will shift more load into that bottom position. And if you don't have access to a preacher curl bench or machine, these can also be done standing using an inclined bench. A lot of people shy away from preacher curls because of some gruesome viral video they saw of someone's biceps tearing off the bone, and while preacher curls probably carry a slightly higher relative risk compared to other curls, the absolute risk is still very low. And for every person you see online getting injured, there are countless thousands of others you don't see who are perfectly fine. Just make sure you're properly warmed up, using a weight you can lift under control with good technique, and if you do experience any discomfort, then just switch to something else. Another great option for biceps is a facing away cable curl, and this can either be done single arm or with a straight bar that runs in between your legs. And besides hitting your biceps effectively, these can also provide a nice grazing effect on each rep if that's something you enjoy. Keep in mind that anytime you perform a cable curl, the heaviest part of the lift will be the point where your forearms and the cable form a 90-degree angle. So as you can see here, the facing away version is hardest toward the bottom, whereas if you're facing the stack, it'll be more difficult a bit higher up in the range. Now if you're standing right up close, then you can still get a good mid-position cable curl, but if you're standing further away, it'll be more short position. And you can also perform these seated using a bench for a bit bit more stability if you've progressed far enough to where the weight stack is starting to pull you backward. This portion of the fly curl press is legit, but resist the temptation to go full-blown combo exercise and just train your chest separately. And then third on the list, no matter how fancy people try to get with their curls, you can never go wrong with a basic-ass old-school free weight variation, whether that's a barbell curl or a dumbbell curl. These will be mid-position focused. Yes, they are slightly less stable if you're doing them standing, but stability shouldn't be a limiting factor as long as you're not ego lifting. Bodybuilders have been building massive biceps for decades using simple free weight curls. I personally did nothing but barbell and dumbbell curls for the first 5 years of training and made excellent gains. And these are a perfectly good option regardless of what some so-called optimal science-based TikTok lifter with 6 months of training experience might try to say. If you do want some added stability, then a seated dumbbell variation works well, or you can also perform them using a lat pull-down machine like you see here, which allows you to drive your arms back against the pad. However, I'd only recommend that if your gym is quiet and no one is waiting on the pull-down machine for back training. In terms of execution, it's pretty hard to truly screw up a curl since it's a pretty straightforward movement, but there are a few main things to keep in mind. Number one is to minimize swinging and momentum. A slight bit of natural body movement is fine, and you don't need to lift like a perfect robot, but you do want to keep things relatively strict overall. If you're aggressively dry humping the bar on every rep, you're doing it wrong. Second is to use a controlled negative rather than just letting the weight free fall. You don't need to overly exaggerate this. Slow negatives actually don't increase muscle growth compared to faster ones, but it's still a good idea to lower the weight deliberately to reduce joint stress and keep your form standardized. And then third is to keep your elbows mostly stationary throughout the curl. Again, some slight movement is fine, but if you really start dragging your elbows forward, then you'll be shifting more emphasis onto shoulder flexion as opposed to elbow flexion, which is going to be more front delt. The biceps technically are a shoulder flexor, but they're very weak at that function. As far as volume goes, around 3 to 10 direct sets per muscle per week is the general range I recommend, which might not sound like a lot, and it isn't if you don't actually train hard. But if you do, and you're genuinely lifting with high effort within a rep or so of failure and going all the way to failure here and there, then this isn't as low volume as you might think and will work well for most people. And since the biceps already receive some stimulation during compound back exercises as well, they would fall more toward the mid to lower end of that range, so that could be anywhere from as few as 3 direct sets per week up to around roughly 6. Not saying you can't do more than that, but if exercise selection, effort, and technique are all on point, then at the very least it's a good starting point to work from. For rep ranges, technically any range can work if proximity to failure is the same, but my overall recommended sweet spot would be about 4 to 10 reps per set. You can do curls anywhere within that range, and there's no rule that isolation exercises need to be done with higher reps. This isn't about chasing the pump or the burn, it's about training close to failure and progressing the load over time, and the same principles apply regardless of the exercise. However, if you're still a novice or you do experience wrist or elbow discomfort with lower reps, then you can push it more toward the upper end of that range. And these general guidelines are the same approach used in my complete TrainWise system, which shows you exactly how to properly grow every muscle along with the exact structured workouts you need for the most efficient gains. Most people are out there spending way too many hours in the gym on useless fluff and just end up spinning their wheels, and inside TrainWise, I condense it all down to what you truly need so you can get the results you're after with just a few hard sets a few times per week. It also has built-in progress tracking tools to keep you moving forward consistently, customized nutrition targets based on your goals, macro-friendly recipes, exclusive educational content, and community support where you can access myself and the other TrainWise coaches to ask your questions and stay accountable. Whether you want to build muscle, lose fat, or both, the app has all the tools and information you need, and you can get started at trainwiseapp.com. The link is in the description box and in a pinned comment. Alright, so that covers the biceps, and next up, of course, we have the triceps. Even though they're not considered to be a showy muscle like the biceps and don't tend to get as much love in most people's training, they're actually a larger muscle than most people think. Roughly equal in volume to the pecs, the lats, the traps, and they make up about 2/3 of your upper arm mass. There are 3 individual heads, the medial, lateral, and long head. Now the first 2 are very simple because they only attach to the humerus and perform elbow extension, and so any movement that involves elbow extension, whether it's an isolated triceps exercise or a compound chest or shoulder press, those will all train the medial and lateral heads effectively. However, the long head is unique in that it's the one head that crosses the shoulder joint, and in addition to elbow extension, it also performs shoulder extension. And since compound presses involve both elbow extension but also shoulder flexion, which is the opposite action of shoulder extension, that means that even though the long head is shortening at the elbow as you press, it's also lengthening at the shoulder at the same time, which means the muscle doesn't significantly change in length throughout the movement and doesn't experience high levels of tension as a result. So if you're relying on the big compounds only, your triceps long head will likely be underdeveloped, and this is a case where isolation work is essential for maximum growth. Just like the biceps though, this doesn't need to be made overly complicated with 1,000,001 fancy variations. At the end of the day, elbow extension is also just bending your elbow, but in the opposite direction. So that can be done with a push down, which I'd put as the #1 go-to movement, since the long head appears to have the best leverage for elbow extension when the shoulder is neutral with the arm down at your side. There are endless push down variations available. One is not going to be massively better than another. Most of it comes down to what you connect with best and what feels smoothest on your wrists and elbows. There's the most basic variation, which is to do them standing using a straight bar or a rope attachment. Single arm also works, and you might find that it feels more natural to flare your elbow out to the side and push at roughly a 45-degree angle. And if you do like that more angled arm path, then a crossbody variation can be used if you want to hit both arms at the same time. And if you've gotten very strong on push downs and want something a bit more stable and locked in so the stack isn't pulling your body upward, then a Poliquin push down is a good option for that. Or one other little hack if you want to stay standing is to wear a weight belt to keep yourself more anchored to the floor. You might get a few weird looks in the gym, but this actually does work quite well. And like we covered with curls, remember that the hardest part of the range will be where your forearms and the cable form a 90-degree angle. So the further you stand from the machine, the more you'll emphasize the shortened position, and the closer you stand, the more it'll be lengthened position. In terms of execution, the same general rules apply here as they did with curls. Keep your torso mostly locked in place, though a slight bit of natural body movement is okay, control the negative, and keep your elbows relatively stationary rather than letting them drift really far back and forth. After pushdowns, to train the long head in a more stretched position, a skull crusher and/or overhead extension can be used for that. Since the long head crosses the shoulder and performs shoulder extension, putting your shoulder into a more flexed position will cause the long head to stretch. And similar to pushdowns, there are many different ways these can be done effectively. For skull crushers, that could mean a straight bar, dumbbells, or cable, but for most people, dumbbells are typically the best choice because they allow for more freedom of movement at the shoulders and elbows compared to a bar, but they also don't require the extra setup of a cable. And there are two main ways you can execute a skull crusher. The first is to lower the weight toward your forehead, which will be a pure elbow extension focused movement, and the second is to tilt your arms back and lower the weight down behind your head, which will also challenge the shoulder extension component of the long head. And this version also tends to be easier on the elbows if that's a concern for you, so you can try both and see what feels best for you. In terms of angles, skull crushers can be done using a flat bench, or if you want a bit more stretch, then an incline angle is an option too. And finally, we have overhead extensions, which are the most stretch-focused movement of the three. Again, any implement can be used, but dumbbells and cables will usually feel the most comfortable for most people. My top choices would be either a single arm dumbbell or cable variation. Any of these that you see here will work well depending on your preference. You don't necessarily need to do push-down, skull crushers, and overhead extensions in your program all at the same time. You could, but one or two variations during any given training cycle would work well in combination with all the compound pressing that you're already doing and just rotating variations over time. Along with those direct isolation exercises, you can also include a compound pressing variation such as a close grip press, narrow grip dip, or JM press, but just keep in mind that those will all still be medial and lateral head focused because of that movement at the shoulder like we covered earlier. As far as volume goes, similar to the biceps, around 3 to 6 direct sets per week is a good guideline, assuming you're truly training hard and progressively. Remember that the medial and lateral heads will already receive a lot of work during your compound chest and shoulder pressing, and so the main purpose of isolated triceps work is to make sure you're getting enough stimulus for the long head. Anywhere from 4 to 10 reps is also fine, but going a bit more toward the upper end can make sense to minimize elbow stress if that is an issue for you. When it comes to building your biceps and triceps, the information in this video will cover all your bases, and again, if you want to learn how to take all of this and plug it into a fully structured workout to maximize gains in every muscle group, along with more detailed form tutorials, progress tracking tools, and the entire nutritional side laid out for you as well, make sure to check out my complete TrainWise app. The links are down below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date. Here's another video I'd recommend watching now. Hope this was helpful, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.